The flood that year didn't just wash away houses. It washed away people's mercy. I realized that in the moment, Cole looked down at an iron cage bobbing in the filthy water and said, "Let it die. It's just a dog." I remember falling silent for exactly 3 seconds. Those 3 seconds felt longer than a lifetime. Then I turned back and looked into the Doberman puppy's eyes, deep brown, trembling, part fear, part plea. If I walked away, it would die. And if I stayed quiet, a piece of me might die with it. I don't know what made me move. I only remember water splashing, Cole yelling behind me, the wind hissing past my face as I swung the bow back around. I promised myself I would save it, even if I had to stand against the whole world. My name's Mason Reed. I'm 32. I build things for a living in Marshfield, Louisiana, a small town threaded with bayous where everyone knows everyone, and disasters feel like something that happens far away. Until Hurricane Remy arrived. 3 days. 3 days, and the town was swallowed. Roads became canals. Roofs became rafts. The cries for help, they vanished. I couldn't sit still. So I signed up as a volunteer, rowing through the water searching for people trapped. They put me on a team with Cole Atwood, an old hand at the wheel with a mouth you want to sock. Cole was a few years older, blunt, his accent thick with the bayou, and he regarded the world as if anyone who suffered had only themselves to blame. The first morning we met, he said straight to my face, "I don't go rescuing fools. I do what I'm told. You hear me?" I nodded. I didn't want trouble. But somewhere in that nod, I also knew one day Cole and I would clash. That morning, the sky felt like it might fall into the water. The air was heavy sour and as cold as steel. The smell of the flood, you never forget it. It carried gasoline and rot, and the ghosts of what used to be someone's home, wet floorboards, picture frames, soggy books, a stuffed animal. I took it in, and a single thought crowded my head. The world has been turned inside out. We rode down streets that used to be neighborhoods now drowned. Mailboxes rose like little graves. Cole sat at the bow with the radio cigarette smoke mixing with the steam thick and choking. "You tired of this yet, Mason?" he said. "Storms get worse every year and folks still stay stupid. Won't leave then cry when the water comes." I kept my mouth shut. Arguing with Cole was like throwing stones into mud. It only made the water darker. We'd been out 3 days with nothing. No voices, no barking, not even birds. Just the soft thrum of motors and the slap of water against the hull like a heart slowing down. I was thinking about turning back when I heard a faint noise. Not loud, a tiny metallic clink. I looked up. Under an old wooden bridge, something gray was snagged on a piling. At first I thought it was trash, but as we drew closer I saw the shape of a cage. Cole glanced at me and sighed, "Trash, don't stop." But my chest went tight. Something inside that cage was moving. I raised the binoculars. In the murky water, a small creature lay on its side, soaked with black and tan fur, its legs trembling. A Doberman puppy, no older than 4 months. It tried to lift its head and couldn't. Water had filled half the cage and kept rising. I lowered the binoculars, my heart racing. Cole stopped the boat. "There's a puppy trapped down there." He followed my finger, frowned, and let out a dry laugh. "You're kidding, right, Mason? That's a dog. We're here to save people. But there aren't any people left to save. Can't you see 3 days?" He shrugged and exhaled smoke. "Good. Fewer calls. Don't waste time on dumb animals." I didn't answer. I just looked at the cage. A gale shoved more water against the bars, and the puppy curled inward, making a sound so small only someone listening closely would hear. I knew if I did nothing, it would be dead within half an hour. Cole added, voice flat, "I had a dog once. It bit my boy. I shot it. After that, I don't waste pity on those creatures." I stared at him, and my grandfather's words rang in my head. "The measure of a man is how he treats what can do him no good." Cole was not that man, and if I stood with him, maybe I wouldn't be the man I wanted to be either. I said quietly, "Cole, don't throttle up. I'm going down." He turned, eyes narrowed. "You're crazy. We don't save dogs." "You hear me," I inhaled. "If you won't go, I will." He snorted, thumbed the choke, and said, "Then stay and drown with it, Mason." As he turned his back and his hand found the throttle, I moved. No thought, no hesitation, no fear. I shoved hard. Cole lost his footing and slid off the boat with a heavy splash. He cursed and yelled, but I had the tiller and spun the bow back. "I'll be back when I've got it," I yelled. Then I floored it and ran toward the cage teetering in the dirty current. The boat surged toward the cage like it was being sucked into a whirlpool of brown water. Wind slapped my face. Water beat against my skin, stinging. The engine thudded steadily beneath me, matching the hammer of my heart. Behind me, Cole's voice still roared, somewhere lost in that vast, muddy flood, but the sounds blurred. All that remained was my ragged breathing and the slap of water against the hull. The cage was snagged on a wooden piling beneath the old bridge, half submerged, listing with the current. Every wave pushed the water higher, threading it through the iron bars. The Doberman puppy lay still. Only its eyes moved wide, terrified, clinging to whatever light they could find. I shut the engine and let the boat drift in. Suddenly, everything fell quiet in a way that made the skin on my arms prickle. No motor, no wind. Just the deep, low whisper of the flood, as if the whole world was holding its breath to see whether I'd make it in time. I said softly, my voice cracking from cold, and something else, easy little one. "I'm coming." I edged the boat close, one arm braced on the slippery gunwale, the other gripping the mooring rope. The cage was only a couple of meters away, but the eddying water pitched the boat hard. I slipped my knee, smashed the metal lip, a hot shock of pain, but I kept going. The puppy tracked me with those big eyes like it understood its fate had been passed to a stranger. The water had reached its neck. Once it tried to lift its head and collapsed mouth open, sucking air. I could see that breath, fragile, thin, but it was there. I reached for the first iron bar. Cold cut through me. The metal was slick as if greased. The cage was jammed against the bridge root, tangled with branches and old wires. I heaved and nothing moved. My shoulders burned. Salt water splashed my face, bitter and biting. If I didn't get it open, the water would fill the cage in minutes. I fumbled in my bag and found the small rescue pliers, the only tool I had. The tips were rusty, but they were still sharp. I clamped them on the latch and twisted with everything I had. The metal screamed, stiff, stubborn, as if it didn't want to give. "Come on, come on." I ground my teeth and pulled again, and then crack. The sound cut through me like a chain breaking inside my chest. The latch gave. The door popped open, slapped the water, throwing up a spray of muddy droplets. I slipped my hand inside. The puppy shrank into the corner, all fur and fear. I kept my voice level, though it trembled. "It's okay, baby. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to get you out." I let my hand hover in the water. 1 second. 2. Then the puppy nudged my fingertip with its nose freezing cold, trembling. It made a tiny sound, and then so fragile it felt sacred it licked my finger. My eyes burned. All right, out you go." I shoved both arms in and lifted it. Its body was weightless, like it had nothing left but skin and bone. Fur clung in wet clumps. Breath came in ragged little threads. Water sluiced from its black and tan coat as I pressed it to my chest and felt that faint, uneven thud of its heart, weak but alive. One slip and we could both topple. The boat rocked hard. Spray lashed my back. The wind keened in my ears. I dropped to my knees, braced, and hauled us both onto the deck, my back soaked through, hands numb, but finally I eased it down. It lay there, barely moving. I fumbled for the spare life vest and wrapped it around the pup. I put my ear to its ribs. The heartbeat was there, stuttering and slow. I rubbed its chest, whispering like a prayer. Breathe, please breathe. 1, 2, 3 seconds. It coughed a froth at its lips, then a breath, then another. It was weak, but real. The sound struck me like a blow to the heart. I laughed, a wet, shaky sound, tears tangled in the rain. Good little one. I pulled the emergency foil blanket from the kit and swaddled it. It shivered, eyes squeezed shut, breath rasping like a thin rope of smoke. I huddled over it to cut the wind. At that moment, a strip of sun forced its way through the thick cloud, a thin golden blade that struck the water and made it glitter like metal. I looked down at this tiny soaked thing that was somehow still breathing. In that instant, I knew every risk, every word they might hurl at me later had been worth it. The radio crackled. Cole's voice ragged with wind. Mason, are you out of your mind? You're gonna get us fired, you hear me? I pressed the transmit and said softly, call me crazy if you want. I choose to be human. Then I cut the mic, fired the engine, and turned the bow upriver toward the higher road and dry ground. One hand kept the foil blanket in place, the other held the wheel. Every time the puppy trembled, I murmured, sleep. We're almost there. I didn't know if it would make it, but I knew I wouldn't let it die alone. The wind whipped my face as I steered the boat upstream. Brown water slapped against the hull, spitting up flecks of foam the color of rust. Ahead, the road had vanished beneath the flood. Only the tips of power poles rose like ghostly silhouettes above the water. I gripped the wheel with one hand, the other resting on the silver emergency blanket wrapped around the trembling Doberman puppy. His body was so small I could almost cover him completely with my palms. His breaths came in fragile bursts, shallow and uneven. I whispered to him the way you'd whisper to a child, sleep, little one. I promise I won't let anything happen to you. The radio hissed, Cole's voice sharp and angry, but I didn't care anymore. The world had narrowed to this, me the boat, and the faint heartbeat beneath the foil. The sun had already slipped behind a line of fallen trees, leaving only a smear of pale orange bleeding across the water. I steered toward what used to be County Road 9, now a long muddy ribbon of flooded earth. I lifted the puppy into my arms and stepped off. The water reached my knees, thick with silt, every step dragging like I was walking through grief itself. Jet whimpered softly against my shoulder, the sound so faint it broke my chest open. It was a reminder time was running out. I shoved the wet hair off my forehead, whispering through chattering teeth, hang on, Jet, don't you leave me halfway through this. After what felt like miles, 2 maybe more, I saw light. Dim, flickering, but real. A white sign emerged through the mist. Riverbend Animal Clinic. My heart kicked hard. I ran. The door burst open, a rush of cool air, disinfectant, and wet fur hit me all at once. Behind the counter stood a woman with her hair tied back, a lab coat streaked with water. She looked up, calm eyes, kind but alert. Dr. Naomi Ellis. I gasped, words tumbling out. He was trapped in the flood. He's shaking, can't breathe right. I don't know if he's going to make it. She didn't waste a breath. Let me see him. I laid Jet on the cold metal table. The vet and her assistant moved fast towels, thermometers, stethoscopes, oxygen line. Severe hypothermia, she muttered, voice steady but urgent. Possible aspiration from dirty water. We need fluids, a heat wrap, and oxygen, now. I stood frozen in the corner, clothes, dripping, hands trembling. Everything else faded until only the rhythmic drip of the IV filled the room. Tick, tick, tick. The fluorescent light reflected off Jet's eyes, still open, still dazed but alive. Jet, I whispered, you hear me. You're safe now. Just hold on. and somehow, as if he understood, his ears twitched once, twice, and I saw his tiny chest rise just a bit higher. Naomi glanced back at me, sweat shining on her brow, a faint smile crossing her face. Heartbeats stabilizing. He's weak, but he's fighting. I sank into a chair, breath-shaking body gone weightless. A laugh slipped out, half relief, half disbelief. Thank you for believing me. Naomi shook her head softly. Not you, she said. Him. These little souls. They don't need much. Just one chance. I looked at Jet, wrapped in warm cloth of tube taped to his tiny paw. Outside, the wind still howled. Rain hammered the windows. But inside that small white room, the world finally went quiet. And for the first time in 3 long days, I felt warm. That night, I didn't leave the clinic. Naomi told me I should go home and rest, but I shook my head. I can't leave him alone. She just smiled, that quiet, knowing smile, and said nothing more. The room was so still I could hear the IV line clicking softly, 1 drop at a time, tick, tick, tick. At first, the sound made me tense. But after a while it became something else, a second heartbeat, syncing with my own. I sat on an old wooden chair in the corner, watching Jet sleep inside the warming blanket, his small body wrapped snugly in layers of soft cloth. The yellow light above us brushed across his black and tan fur, turning it into something fragile and beautiful. Outside, the hallway window trembled from the wind. The rain had finally eased, leaving only the occasional drip on the tin roof, a faint, rhythmic whisper. The scent of antiseptic mixed with wet clothes and damp fur, forming a smell I would forever associate with hope. I don't know how long I sat there. My eyes were heavy, but every time I drifted off, I woke to the sound of Jet's faint breathing. I was terrified it might stop. Terrified that I'd open my eyes and the room would be empty. Near midnight, Naomi returned. She placed her hand on Jet's forehead, then gave a small, tired smile. His temperature's rising. His body's responding well. I exhaled, the weight lifting from my chest for the first time in hours. Do you think he'll make it? I asked quietly. Naomi looked at me, not with certainty, but with a kind of faith. If you manage to bring him here, she said softly, then maybe God doesn't want to take him back just yet. Her words silenced me. I turned back to Jet. A tiny body a few hours ago, half submerged in filthy floodwater, was breathing steadily now. Some people might not call that a miracle, but to me, it was the most miraculous thing a person could witness. I pulled my jacket over my lap and leaned against the wall. Outside, a streetlight glowed through the rain-streaked glass, casting a faint orange shimmer across the room. And for some reason, I thought of Cole, of his cold eyes, when he'd said, "Let it die." But I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had drained away, replaced by a strange calm. Because now I understand, some things don't need reasons. They just need to be done. Around 3 a.m., I heard something small. Jet's breathing had changed, steadier, stronger. He stirred, tilting his head slightly before opening his eyes. For a single heartbeat, his gaze met mine, wet, cloudy, but alive. I whispered, "Welcome back, little one." He blinked, then slowly reached out his tongue to lick the tip of my finger, weak, deliberate, but full of intent. And in that moment, I knew. He was going to live. When dawn finally crept through the blinds, the clinic glowed with soft golden light. I heard Naomi's footsteps behind me, her voice light, almost cheerful. "You haven't slept, have you?" "I didn't dare," I said with a tired smile, eyes still on Jet. She nodded, looking at the puppy. "He's tougher than we thought." I brushed my fingers gently over his head and whispered, "Not just tougher. He's teaching me how to believe in good again." That morning, as I stepped out of the clinic, the sky had cleared. The air was still cold, but inside me, everything felt bright again. Jet lay wrapped in his blanket, breathing softly, and I knew, from that moment on, neither of us would ever be alone again. The next morning, the first sunlight slipped through the fogged window. The clinic was quiet, filled only with the faint shuffle of footsteps and the soft clink of a metal spoon against a ceramic cup. The smell of coffee blended with disinfectant, sharp but somehow comforting. I sat where I had been all night on the same wooden chair beside the table, head bowed, eyes fixed on the slow rhythm of Jet's breathing. Last night he had opened his eyes and licked my hand, a fragile gesture, but real. Now he slept soundly, wrapped in the silver emergency blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Naomi walked in with a cup of coffee in hand, her voice low but warm. "You've been up all night, haven't you?" I nodded. I was afraid if I fell asleep he might leave. She smiled and took a seat across from me. "Well, you can rest easy now," she said. "He's not going anywhere." I looked at her, not sure I'd heard right. She set the cup down, leaned closer to the table, and studied the little bundle. "Temperature's normal, lungs are clear, heart strong. I think he's made it." The words stopped me cold. Then a wave of heat surged through me. I jumped up, staring down at Jet, and right then he opened his eyes. Those deep brown eyes looked at me brighter than the night before. Alert, curious, as if he recognized me. I leaned down and brushed my hand over his head. This time, he didn't pull away. He lifted his chin and nudged into my palm. I smiled, a real smile, one I hadn't felt in years. "Good morning, Jet." Naomi watched us quietly, then said, "You know, under conditions like that, most don't survive. He's a special one." I nodded. "No," I said, softly, "he just chose to live. I only helped him finish the choice he'd already made." Naomi was silent for a while, then spoke again. "If you'd like, we can keep him here for a few days just for monitoring. After that, he'll go to the rescue center." I looked up quickly, words spilling out before I could think. "No, I'll take him home." Naomi didn't seem surprised. She smiled like she'd been waiting for that answer. "I thought you might say that." She pulled a notepad from the drawer, scribbled a few lines, and handed it to me. "Feed soft food every 3 hours. No baths for a week. Keep warm. Avoid loud noise. You can pick him up this afternoon," she said. Then paused. "But Mason, make sure you're ready. He's been given a second chance. And that chance comes with you." I nodded. "I am ready, Naomi. Maybe. I needed a second chance, too." That afternoon, when I returned, Jet was standing on his own. His black and tan coat was dry now, his eyes clear, and his little tail wagged in quiet excitement. He walked toward me, hesitated for a second, then lifted his head and licked the inside of my wrist right where it was still scraped raw from the night before. I didn't speak. I just bent down and held him. For a moment, every sound in the world faded until there was only warmth. Naomi's voice broke the silence, soft but full. "Have you named him yet?" I looked down at the puppy and smiled. "Yeah, I call him Jet. Because he survived the mud and the steel like a piece of metal launched out of the dark." Naomi nodded. "It suits him, just like the way he found you." When I stepped out of the clinic, Jet in my arms, the late sun broke through the clouds, painting his face in amber light. And in that quiet glow, a thought came to me. Maybe all any of us really need is one person who believes we're worth saving. And today I got to be that person. That afternoon, the sky after the storm was clearer than I'd ever seen it. The gray clouds had been swept away, leaving a pale blue canopy and thin sunlight spilling across the soaked earth. No more rain, just the slow drip of water from the eaves and the rich, raw scent of soil rising from the mud, the smell of life returning. I opened the truck door and gently set Jet on the passenger seat. He tilted his head, ears drooping, eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and fear. His neck was still wrapped in gauze, but his stance was steadier now. I smiled faintly, gripping the wheel. "Let's go home, little one." The road back to Marshfield was still half flooded in places. Trees lay broken across the ditches, signs bent, and power lines tangled overhead like webs. But to me, it all looked beautiful because, after days of darkness, the sun had finally come out, and beside me sat a tiny soul that refused to die. Jet lifted his head now and then to peer out the window. Each bump in the road startled him, but soon he'd rest his head on my arm again, breathing softly. His breath was warm. I could feel every inhale, every exhale, a rhythm that steadied the one inside my own chest. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this calm. My house used to be nothing more than a place to sleep, a hollow space of wood walls, scattered tools, and silence. But when I parked in front of the porch that day, it suddenly felt alive. Maybe because I was bringing home something smaller, weaker, but for the first time in years I felt needed. I opened the door. Damp air swept in. The last light of the day filtered through the blinds, laying soft golden stripes across the wooden floor. I set Jet down. He froze, sniffing the air as if memorizing every new scent. Then he began to wander, one cautious step at a time, slow, uncertain, but determined. When he reached the fireplace, I crouched beside him and struck a match. The first spark caught snapping to life, throwing a warm glow over his black and tan coat. He stopped staring at the flame, then quietly curled up beside it. No more trembling, just half-closed eyes and peace. I sat down next to him, draped the silver blanket from the clinic over his small body. That's when I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. Maybe he'd given back the courage I'd lost somewhere along the way. I turned on the radio. The signal was weak, faint voices talking about cleanup crews and power lines. The world outside was still chaos, but in that room there was only the crackle of the fire and the sound of a puppy breathing. I reached for the cold coffee on the table and leaned back against the wall. Jet shifted, resting his head on my leg. I ran my fingers through his fur, soft, warm, smelling faintly of smoke. Naomi's words echoed in my head. He's been given a second chance, and that chance comes with you. I looked down at him and smiled. A second chance, huh? Maybe it's for both of us. That night, for the first time in years, I left a lamp on. Not because I feared the dark, but because I wanted Jet to know that somewhere a light would always be waiting for him. When I finally drifted off, he was still there, head resting on my leg chest, rising and falling in gentle rhythm. Outside, the storm was gone. And inside that small wooden house, two survivors had found each other. 3 weeks had passed since the day I brought Jet home. It wasn't long, but it was enough to turn my silent, hollow house into a place that breathed with footsteps, warmth, and life. Every morning, as sunlight crept through the window, Jet was always the first to wake. He'd rest his tiny paws on my chest and scratch lightly, as if to say, "Wake up, the world's waiting." At first I'd laugh and grumble that he was a nuisance, but slowly I realized it was the most beautiful alarm I'd ever known. His recovery was astonishing. The wounds had dried, his coat grew thick again, and those deep brown eyes regained a clear, gentle light. And I changed too. When I left the house now, I no longer kept my head down or carried the damp smell of the past. I walked upright, and Jet trotted beside me, tail wagging, full of joy that spilled over into the world. People in town began to recognize us. They'd stop on the main road, smiling. "Is that the dog you rescued during the storm?" someone asked. I nodded. "Yeah, his name's Jet." They'd smile softly, the kind of smile that felt like sunlight after rain. From then on, whenever I passed by, people would crouch to pet him. And somehow he made everyone gentler. I started picking up repair work again. fixing storm-damaged houses, rebuilding porches, sanding old doors. Everywhere I went, Jet sat quietly by the doorstep, never barking, never fussing. Just waiting. One afternoon, a little girl in the neighborhood fell off her bike. She cried so hard her shoulders shook. Jet walked up to her, sat down, and gently licked her hand. The crying stopped. She stared at him for a moment, then smiled. I stood there watching my throat tightening. Sometimes a small creature can do what people have forgotten how to listen with the heart. That night, the sky was clear. I sat on the porch while Jet lay by my feet. The moonlight rippled across the distant water, the same place where 3 weeks ago that iron cage had floated. I would never forget that moment. But now it didn't hurt. Now it just made me grateful that I hadn't turned away. Naomi called. Her voice was bright with news. I saw it on the local station, she said. They aired your rescue story. People are donating, volunteering, the rescue center's getting more help than ever. I laughed. All that, because of one dog. No, she said softly, but firmly, because kindness spreads faster than people think. I looked down at Jet. He lifted his head, his brown eyes reflecting the moon. You hear that, I said, quietly. You're making people better. He stretched, pressing his head into my hand. I didn't know how much he understood, but I knew he felt it. Before going to bed that night, I opened the window. A gentle breeze slipped in, carrying the scent of earth grass and damp wood. I felt peace, the kind that doesn't need to be taught, the kind that comes from knowing a small life is sleeping safely beside you. I thought about people like Cole, the ones who believe the world is only worth saving when it benefits them. I wasn't angry anymore, because I understood now there's only one way to change people like that, by not becoming them. When I turned off the lamp, Jet lifted his head ears, twitching. I reached down, stroked his fur, and whispered, "Sleep, buddy. We've got a whole life ahead of us." He sighed, curled up tail twitching in slow rhythm. In the dark, I could hear his breathing, steady, warm, like the heartbeat of life itself returning to this house. I tell this story not to be praised, and not to boast that I saved a dog. I tell it because I want you to remember compassion is never a small act. If that day I had turned away, Jet wouldn't be here. But maybe I would have lost the last good part of myself too. So if someday you see someone or something that needs help, even if it's just a shivering cat, a lost dog, or a stranger on the side of the road, remember this: their second chance might begin with you. And now, I ask you, the one watching this story, have you ever saved a life? If you have, share it below. Because I believe that every act of kindness shared today might help someone somewhere choose to turn back instead of walking away. Let's keep spreading compassion so that dogs like Jet will never be abandoned again, and no one will ever have to face the storm alone.